some easy ones. We started fouling, getting to the free throw line, and turning the ball over. I mean, there were moments where,
The gymnasium at Dowling Catholic High School was electric that Friday night, buzzing with anticipation and overflowing with fans who had come to witness something extraordinary. And as the scoreboard ticked toward the end of the game, the crowd knew they were about to see history unfold. Yet few could have imagined that the true legacy of the evening would have little to do with numbers and records, and far more to do with the quiet grace of one young athlete who understood that greatness is measured not only in points scored, but in how one honors those who stand on the other side of victory. Caitlin Clark had just reached an astonishing milestone, dropping her 60th point against Mason City, shattering records and leaving even the most seasoned basketball followers stunned. Yet as the buzzer sounded and the Dowling Catholic fans erupted in wild celebration, their cheers echoing like thunder in the packed gym, Caitlin was not swept up in the frenzy of her own triumph, but instead walked with quiet resolve toward her defeated opponents, her jersey soaked in sweat, her face marked not by the arrogance of dominance, but by the seriousness of purpose that only those who see beyond the game itself can carry. And it was in those next few moments that her character revealed itself in a way that would be remembered long after the statistics had faded. On the Mason City bench, players sat with their heads in their hands, their shoulders heavy with the crushing weight of defeat, their dreams collapsing under the realization that one opponent had outscored their entire team. And though Coach Maria Santos attempted to summon words of comfort, the silence of despair clung to her players. For how could one console teenagers who had just been broken down in front of an entire community? Yet Caitlin had noticed something deeper during the match, something more human and piercing than the numbers on the scoreboard. Because throughout the game her eyes had been drawn to Sarah Martinez, Mason City's point guard and a senior playing in what would be her final high school game, whose face bore the unmistakable signs of struggle and heartbreak, whose shoulders sagged lower with each missed shot, each turnover, each moment when the score grew more lopsided. And Caitlin, remembering what it felt like to drown in self-doubt, knew she could not let the night end without reaching out. Softly, almost tentatively, she called Sarah's name, and when the girl looked up with red eyes, braced for some empty platitude or condescending remark, she was startled to meet not mockery but genuine respect in Caitlin's gaze, as Caitlin extended her hand and said, "You played with heart tonight. I saw how you fought for every possession, even when things looked impossible, and that takes real courage." And the gym, sensing the shift in energy, began to quiet as the extraordinary moment unfolded. For sportsmanship at its purest rarely announces itself with grandeur but speaks instead in the soft language of empathy. Yet Caitlin did not simply shake Sarah's hand and leave. She sat down right there on the Mason City bench among the tearful, defeated players, breaking every expectation of what a star athlete should do after such a triumph. And she began speaking to each one individually, telling Marcus, their young center who had fouled out in his desperate attempt to guard her, that his relentless defense would one day make him great, assuring their shooting guard that despite a tough night, his confidence and rhythm would come if he kept believing, offering words that carried not hollow comfort but the weight of sincerity, for she had been where they were, and she remembered too clearly the night when she had sat crying after Dowling Catholic were crushed by a powerhouse team from Chicago, when as a freshman she scored only 8 points and wondered if she was even good enough to belong on the court. A night that might have broken her spirit had it not been for Jessica Williams, the senior star from the opposing team who walked into Dowling's locker room to sit beside her, ignoring her own victory celebrations to tell Caitlin that she was special and that one bad game did not define her. Words that lit a fire in Caitlin's heart and gave her the strength to keep going. And now, 3 years later, Caitlin was paying that gift forward, choosing not to bask in her own dominance, but to lift up those who had been humbled by it, understanding that the truest victories are not written on scoreboards, but in the lives we touch when it would be easier to walk away. And as Coach Santos watched in awe, she realized that her players would carry this memory with them forever, that the sting of defeat would soften in time, but the kindness shown to them by an opponent in their darkest moment would endure, becoming a story they would tell their children about the night they met Caitlin Clark, not just the basketball prodigy, but the human being who, valued compassion over glory. And indeed, the ripples of that night spread far beyond the gymnasium, for parents in the stands spoke of it to their families. Journalists later wrote about the scene as a rare reminder of what sport is supposed to mean, and young athletes who read those accounts came to see that real greatness lies not in humiliating others, but in offering them dignity even in their lowest moments. And so it is that February evening has become more than a chapter in Caitlin's basketball journey. It has become a parable about empathy, resilience, and the unspoken responsibility of those gifted with extraordinary talent to use it in service of something higher. And though records will always be broken and trophies eventually gather dust, what remains timeless are those moments when victory is transformed into an act of grace, when the game becomes bigger than itself, and when a young woman sitting quietly on an opponent's bench shows us all that true champions are, defined not by how
of Courtney Vandersloot and Allie quickly, and that's more like it, Sloot.
So when we talk about the timing of this team and that it takes a little bit of time to develop chemistry, that's a great example of that.
That night inside the Dowling Catholic High School gymnasium was meant to be remembered for one thing: Caitlin Clark's astonishing 60-point performance against Mason City, a display of dominance so overwhelming it silenced even the most vocal doubters in the stands. Yet the story that would endure had little to do with records, and far more to do with what happened after the final buzzer. When the scoreboard read 89-43, and the defeated Mason City players slumped on the bench, struggling to hold back tears, their young shoulders heavy with the humiliation of being outscored by a single player. Their coach, Maria Santos, searched for words of comfort but found none strong enough to soften the sting. For how does one console teenagers whose dreams have just been dismantled before an entire community? And it was then that Caitlin, instead of basking in the celebration with her teammates, turned her gaze toward the bench she was never expected to approach, walking deliberately across the court with her jersey soaked in sweat, her breathing still heavy from the game, yet her eyes filled with a quiet purpose. For during the match, she had noticed something deeper than the scoreline. The look in Sarah Martinez's eyes, Mason City's senior point guard playing her final high school game, shoulders sagging lower with every missed shot and every turnover, her body language revealing the despair of someone who believed this defeat might be the end of her story. And so Caitlin sat beside her, offering not platitudes but genuine recognition, telling her she had fought for every possession, that courage was not in winning but in refusing to give up. And as the gym slowly fell silent, stunned by this unexpected act of humility, Caitlin turned to the other players too, praising the power forward's relentless rebounding, reassuring the sophomore center Marcus that fouling out in his efforts to defend her was proof of his determination, even offering tactical advice to those who had barely stepped on the court, speaking with the calm authority of someone who understood that sport was about more than glory. Sarah, voice trembling, finally asked, "Why are you doing this?" And Caitlin paused, remembering her own humiliation as a freshman when Dowling were crushed by a powerhouse Chicago side, when she had scored only 8 points and sat crying in the locker room until Jessica Williams, the opponent's star, walked in to sit beside her and tell her she was special. That one bad night did not define her, words that had changed Caitlin's life, and so she answered softly, "Because someone did it for me once when I needed it most. And because tonight doesn't define you, how you respond to it will." And what Caitlin didn't realize was that her father Brent had been recording the interaction, expecting to capture a celebratory video of his daughter's record-breaking night, but instead preserving something far more valuable, a moment of grace that would later go viral not because of the points she scored, but because of the humanity she showed, drawing comments from parents, coaches, and players around the world who praised not her athleticism but her character. And those social media numbers told one story. The real impact unfolded quietly in lives forever changed. Sarah Martinez, who had been ready to quit the sport she loved after that devastating defeat, found new resolve and went on to earn a scholarship at a Division II school later, crediting Caitlin's words as the moment she realized true strength lies not in never falling but in rising again. And Marcus used her encouragement as fuel, dedicating himself in the off-season to refining his footwork and defense until he became one of the state's top players, always pointing to that February night as his turning point.